Hey everybody, welcome to Hints and Guesses, my podcast. Kent here. I want to make a podcast today about the mystical tradition or traditions, really about mysticism. And I'm not coming to you as an expert. I'm not a mystic. I'll come back to that, after a while. But I think the mystical tradition is extremely important. It's kind of like the undercurrent of our religions and spiritualities. It's like a river that flows, and the mystics feed this river with their lives and with their words, with their insights, with their images and visions. Reluctantly, I might add. They feed the river and they keep the thing flowing. Maybe you could even say it's like the lifeblood of our religious and spiritual frames and structures. Like almost as if beneath the surface of our statements and our institutions and our traditions and our libraries, there's a kind of lifeblood, a kind of pulsating lifeblood that feeds these traditions. Maybe you could even say that the mystical experience itself and the great traditions collide in some way, and both are changed. That's kind of my sense for things. And so I want to talk a bit about the mystical. I want to talk about mystical experiences. What are we talking about here? And why might it be important? And I guess my interest in mysticism has been growing in the last few years. And even, if you listen to my last two podcasts about religion, about the religious instinct and why we maybe ought to hesitate being deconstructionists the rest of our lives, saying there's probably something here that's worthy of attention. And anyway, some of my own musings around religion and has kind of awakened again my interest in the mystical tradition. And so I picked up Evelyn Underhill's book, which has been sitting on my shelf for years. She wrote a book, I think it was published in 1918, something like that, or maybe just before, called Mysticism. And she, without question, is a giant of a figure in trying to understand the mystics and offering us something that scholars ever since, not only scholars, but just religious seekers in general, have had something to bounce against. And it's an amazing book, and I'm not going to do it justice, but I am going to pull a few things from her insights about the mystics and the importance of the mystical tradition. So that's kind of where I'm heading. And of course, as always, I hope you'll hear some hints and clues and guesses in here related to your own spiritual longings. What's tugging at your own heart and soul, or might be related to your own resistance, because I think both longing and resistance hold hands. They do for me, for sure. And this is definitely true when it comes to things like God or faith or spirituality or the transcendent. I feel the longing and I feel the resistance, and I maybe just say both matter. So before I dive a little deeper here, a couple things. I've got an Animist program in July, starting July 10. It's a bit last minute, but it's not impossible to sign up for that. If you're interested in Animist, this is a Soulcraft intensive. I'll be guiding with Rebecca Wildbear, who's been on this podcast before. Actually, she wrote a book called Wild Yoga. So we'll be co-guiding an experience not too far from Telluride. And it's a great way to enter into this kind of nature-based, soul-oriented work. And so if that interests you, you can check it out. That's on the Animist website, Animist Valley Institute. And I have a couple things coming up end of July, very beginning of August. I have another Wilderness Within intensive. These are my own intensives. I just did one in Michigan. It was really amazing. Thank you so much. Those of you who came out, it was a very full, intensive, and life-giving for me at least, and I hope for everyone else. So I have one planned July 31st through August 3rd in Colorado, because I'm going to be out that way. The details are on my website. I'm trying to figure out if it's going to go or not. So if you're interested, please send me an email right away. You can even just send me an email, dobsonpilgrimage@gmail.com. If you're interested, I'll send you the fuller details than what's on my website. But yeah, I'm sort of in that stage where I need to get over a critical mass. I'm hoping to guide it with one of my friends at Animus, Emma, who lives out in Colorado. And that's just, if we get enough people, we'll co-guide it. So yeah, let's find out. If you're interested, that's available, but sooner rather than later. I'd love to know. And then I'll be speaking at my friend Michael Hidalgo's church, Denver Community Church, that Sunday, August 4th. And then I'll do a 2-day men's retreat following speaking that Sunday. So August 4, 5, ending on the 6th. So this would be Sunday evening through Tuesday afternoon. Those details are going to be through Denver Community Church. If you're interested and you live out there, you can also send me an email, same email, and I'll connect you. dobsonpilgrimage@gmail.com. Yeah, okay. Maybe that's enough, unless I think of something else. All right. I want to start with an image. And let's imagine for a moment that our consciousness is like a room, or even like a bedroom or your living room. And part of growing up is coming to know the room itself. And exploring the room, you could say. And if you're a curious person and you're on any kind of natural process of psychological and spiritual maturity, you'll be interested in the entire room, and even in the corners of the room and overlooked areas of the room. And if you have enough courage, you might even look under the bed. Like, what are the monsters beneath the bed here? And anyway, you get it. Consciousness is like a room, and we're maybe constantly exploring that room, and maybe, well, obviously, to a certain extent, we never reach the limits. There's always something else, there's always some dimension of the room that we've overlooked, but it's limited. That's the given. We wouldn't say our awareness of the room is the totality of what's possible. No, of course not. Maybe there's a perspective beyond our capacity to even understand the contents of our own room that we're busy exploring, because our consciousness is limited, we could say. And of course, we wouldn't say that our understanding of the room is the understanding of the totality of the house. You know, after all, our perspective, our room, our consciousness, our awareness, our ego, we might even add, doesn't understand even the house that it's living in. Obviously, that should humble each one of us, just to be aware that we live in a house of which we'll never understand its fullness, but worthy of exploration nonetheless. Like T.S. Eliot says, old men ought to be explorers. And this leads me right into the title of this podcast. The old will dream dreams and the young see visions, which is a line from the New Testament. And it's a line that is borrowed from the prophets, but it evokes a certain era, a certain time period, a certain possibility, a certain influx of something fresh and new and wild and untamed and autonomous. The pouring in of the Spirit, you could say, or the descending of fire in the shape of tongues, which is, of course, what that line is is used to allude to what's called Pentecost in the Christian tradition. The old will dream dreams and the young see visions. What is that? What kind of experience is that? And what happens when that begins to break forth? And anyway, back to my sort of elaborate metaphor. We're invited to explore the house. And so who are the mystics? We could say, first of all, they're the ones who sit by the window and who are curious about the light that fills the room, the undifferentiated, uncreated light that is not that illuminates consciousness, you could say, or that holds consciousness in some way. They're interested in, maybe just to be clear about the metaphor, what's outside the room. Is there something outside the room? Is there something in which consciousness itself, our own human consciousness, rests? And what's our relationship with the outside, with the light pouring in through the windows, and maybe an experience of light itself, or of the luminous darkness, just to twist the metaphor a bit. An experience of a living reality that transcends our own egoic rooms is in part, at least what I mean by an experience of the transcendent, or even a mystical experience, a state of consciousness that expands our present room in some way. So they sit by the window and I know my metaphor is getting a little ridiculous at this point, but every once in a while, certain mystics open the window wide open and leave. This is reported as a kind of union with the uncreated, undifferentiated absolute, the light itself, the transcendent, we could say, or to use very traditional words, like God. They open the window and leave altogether, as if that's possible. And their own consciousness is not other than the larger consciousness of God. Now, you could say, well, I don't know if I believe that, or I don't know if that's even possible to be one with the divine, to have one's consciousness merge with the larger consciousness of the universe. But at least we could say that's what the mystics report across traditions. And I'm not, although I did study comparative religion in graduate school, I wouldn't claim to be an expert in this. Mainly it was early Christianity, Judaism, the ancient religions of the Fertile Crescent, a little bit of Greek religious world, and a little bit of Islam, and a tiny bit of Buddhism. That's it. That doesn't make me an expert. But in my own cursory reading of the traditions, the great traditions, there seems to be a kind of harmony here that the mystics say, no, our consciousness can merge with, or is one with, can be one with the consciousness of the universe. Is the universe coming to know itself? Okay, so they open the window and leave, but they leave the window open. This is why I'm arguing we need the mystics. We need to listen to the voices of people like Teresa of Avila and Saint Francis of Assisi and Dionysius the Areopagite, just to throw in someone obscure. Or potentially modern mystics like Evelyn Underhill, who probably would resist the term, saying, I'm not a mystic, I'm a student. Or like Joseph Campbell saying, I don't meditate, I underline, which is his kind of way of backing off claiming to be a mystic. But he certainly seems to have had some experiences of transcendence, and even in his own contemplation of the traditions. Or Carl Jung saying, when asked by the BBC if he believed in God, he said, I don't believe, I know. And he later said he regretted saying that, but it just sort of slipped out. The truth slipped out. There's a kind of knowing, a kind of gnosis that is beyond belief, that is a little like they've tasted reality itself with a capital R, in a way that their original room of consciousness was shaken and shattered. So let me come back to the image. The mystics open the window and leave, but they leave the window open and the breeze blows in. That's what happens when we turn attention to the mystical traditions. We let the breeze come in. We let their description of a larger reality come and mess up the papers on our desk, rearrange our room, blow the curtains in some way. Maybe you've had this experience even reading, the words of the great mystics or poets or even artists, and it sort of messes up the way you thought your room was arranged. And what a gift. And again, that's like what the mystical tradition does to tradition itself. The larger tradition is the breeze comes in and messes up the papers. Oh, you think you know because you've read the Summa Theologica? Actually, this is a good example. Aquinas is a good example of a very serious student of God, a very serious theologian, and theology matters, trying to articulate what do we mean by God and what do we mean by the Christian faith, and what's it like to explore this territory and categorize it and name it and give some order and meaning to it. And he gets almost to the end of the Summa Theologica and he says, everything I've written is straw, and he won't speak again. And then he dies. He says, I will not finish it, and I can't speak of what is actually happening to me. And that's the mystical breaking in. Now, he doesn't speak about it, which is interesting. That's probably a theme of most mystics. They don't want to talk about it, and sometimes they don't. And he says, everything I've written is straw, and now I know, that's, I'm reading between the lines. I know what, I have an experience that makes me mute. It's like Isaiah saying, woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips, and a fiery messenger of God, a seraphim, an angel comes and burns his lips with a coal. It's like, shut your mouth, And so these kinds of symbolic allusions, what do they allude to? They allude to an experience of the transcendent, of opening the window and stepping outside. And they whisper to us, reality is not what you think. Maybe that's, if I can say anything simply, why do we need the mystics? Because they whisper in our ear, reality is not what you think. And we ought to have the humility to say, maybe they're right. And what would it look like for me to sit by the window from time to time? Or to get curious about the breeze that blows in, the breeze at dawn has secrets to teach you. I think that's Rumi. The breeze that comes in by no act of will on or belief, but beyond belief and beyond the human egoic will, the breeze comes in and we experience something mysterious and numinous and strange and hard to explain and synchronistic and mystical. Okay, so that's sort of my elaborate metaphor. And let me read a couple lines just to give you a flavor. Here's a passage from Evelyn Underhill. In mysticism, that love of truth, which we saw as the beginning of all philosophy, leaves the merely intellectual sphere and takes on the assured aspect of personal passion. So she's saying that the mystic is not a philosopher, really. And philosophy has its place, but it's much more like a personal passion than intellectual exploration. Where the philosopher guesses and argues, the mystic lives and looks, and speaks, consequently, the disconcerting language of first-hand experience. And this is the great sort of division, you could say, between the philosopher and the mystic. The philosopher guesses and argues and uses logic and math and premises and carefully crafted thought thought experiments. Lovely, beautiful. The mystic lives and looks and then speaks in a disconcerting language of firsthand experience, saying things like, I don't believe I know. Not the neat dialectic of schools. In other words, it's hard to put any mystic in a school of thought. Hence, while the absolute, this is capitalized, whilst the absolute of the metaphysicians remains a diagram, impersonal and unattainable, the absolute of the mystics is lovable, attainable, and alive. So back to my metaphor, the philosopher might create abstract diagrams, impersonal and unattainable diagrams of why the room might be filled with light, the room of consciousness. The absolute of the mystics, they say, yeah, the uncreated, undifferentiated light is a greater consciousness that's lovable, attainable, and alive. And I know it. I know it from the inside. I don't have to believe it. And so they shake us up. They shake us up. They point back to phenomenology, the actual experience of the transcendent. And one of the things I got from Heschel, which kind of shook me up many years ago when I first got interested in Judaism and I started reading Abraham Heschel, and I think this is in God in Search of Man. He says that, okay, you can critique the biblical accounts. You can look at the, by the way, I'm paraphrasing. I'm just giving you the gist of a kind of argument that he makes in there. So he doesn't use this exact example, but I'm going with it a bit. You can say, all right, did Moses really experience the burning bush? Did a voice of the divine, of the transcendent, of Yahweh really speak to him? And how would we know that? Isn't this just a literary record? And isn't that literary record, hasn't it been edited? And isn't there a theological agenda here? Aren't there inconsistencies in the document? And therefore the document, you could say isn't divinely inspired even. You could say it's just a human record trying to defend a certain theological, political, religious perspective. That's the historical critical approach to biblical text, to religion itself. And Heschel says, okay, but critique the text all you want, challenge it. But he says behind that, potentially, stands experience itself. In other words, here's another way of putting it. You can deny the existence of God. You can deny the existence of revelation abstractly, but you can't deny that certain people experienced God or claim to have experienced God, you could say. You can't deny the phenomenological experience. That is real. Even if you say there's no God, you could say there's an experience of God. So anyway, what's my point here? That the human experience across time, every once in a while, you get a kind of influx of something that blows the mind of the one who is experiencing the numinous and the mysterious. Their own frame is shattered. What they thought was real was an illusion. And reality with a capital R simply grows. I live my life in widening circles that move out across the world. Well, how? Well, something has to come in and crack our frames. Or the window has to be open and the breeze has to blow in. Or in some cases, we just leave the room altogether into a larger room or to a larger house. And anyway, this is worth contemplating. Is it possible that our version of reality is too small? And the mystics just whisper in our ear, yeah, your version of reality is too small. Here's another quote from Evelyn Underhill. Eternity is with us, inviting our contemplation perpetually. So again, back to my image, What's outside the house, what's eternal, transcendent, outside the small room of our egoic consciousness is always with us, and it's inviting our contemplation perpetually. But we are too frightened, lazy, and suspicious to respond. I mean, this is in the early 1900s. I think those tendencies, I know in myself, I'm too scared, too lazy, and too suspicious. Isn't that a summary of how people feel about the spiritual these days? We're frightened, lazy, and suspicious to respond, too arrogant to still our thought. In other words, thinking our frame of reference, whether it's scientific or so-called spiritual, our thought is the center of the universe. She says we're too arrogant to still that monkey mind, to let divine sensation have its way. And here's a little clue about what she means by mystical experience. It's a kind of sensation. That the influx of the transcendent isn't just mental abstractions, but is somatic, to use a fancy word, or bodily, or sensatory, or we sense it. And it starts to have its way. It shapes us. It moves us. It molds us. It blinds us and then causes us to see. Now, she says, it needs industry and goodwill if we would make that transition. So she's saying it does. If we look at the tradition here, it does take some effort. That's why the Buddha sits under the tree. That's why the monk goes into the cave. That's why there are mantras. That's why just keep praying the Jesus prayer in Orthodox mystical tradition. Industry and goodwill. So a kind of intentionality. It's not that. So intentionality matters, we could say. For the process involves a veritable spring cleaning of the soul, a turning out and rearrangement of our mental furniture, a wide opening of closed windows. You can see where I got the metaphor. That the notes of the wild birds beyond our garden may come to us fully charged with wonder and freshness, and drown with their music the noise of the gramophone within. Now, what a sentence. I want to read it again. The process involves a veritable spring cleaning of the soul, a turning out and rearrangement of our mental furniture. That's partly what I'm saying. The breeze of the mystical, of the mysterious, of the numinous comes in and rearranges our room, just blows the papers all over the place and cleans out those rigid processes and ideas and beliefs that they've calcified. A spring cleaning of the soul, a turning out and a rearrangement of our mental furniture, a wide opening of closed windows, that the notes of the wild birds beyond our garden may come to us fully charged with wonder and freshness. It's a way of saying the mystical is not disconnected from what we would call nature, from reality. It's suddenly we hear again the nature of reality, like the wild birds sing their magnificent chorus that speak to us of worlds beyond worlds or worlds within worlds. And they drown with their music the noise of the gramophone within. What a profound phrase. We could even update that phrase. She's using a very modern image at the time, the gramophone within, but we could say the iPhone within, the internet within, this mechanized mind, the mechanized modern mind and its constant loops, being fed by what's unreal. Suddenly the wild birds seem to us more real than anything we could ever find on our phone, so to speak. Those who do this, she says, discover that they have lived in a stuffy world. And this is where, if you're testing, have I had any kind of mystical experiences without getting too high on our horse like Icarus and saying, I'm a mystic and so forth? Have I ever experienced anything? Well, have I ever come out of an experience and thought, my world's too small. My worldview is too small. I'm too stuffy. Those who do this discover that they have lived in a stuffy world, whilst their inheritance was a world of morning glory, of awe and wonder. Of morning glory, where every titmouse is a celestial messenger. Every thrusting bud is charged with the full significance of life. One of the things I think that's so profound about how she's describing the mystical path is that the world itself is fully charged with the divine, with wonder. It's not leaving this world. I think that's what some people think when they hear mystical. They think, oh, people who have left the planet, so to speak. It's actually, she's saying actually they find themselves enveloped in an interconnected co-arising of the divine itself, as if God is breathing in and out in every flower and shrub and bird and being. This is why I think Evelyn Underhill uses the word reality capitalized for God, for what's real. Okay, so pause here. You could ask yourself, is my worldview too small? You could ask yourself, do I long for a larger experience of what's real? And where does that longing come from? And what if I listened to it? What if I trusted that if I sat by the window from time to time, kind of the edge of our consciousness, and started to be curious about the light that pours in, what might happen to me, and might it get me closer to the experience of being fully alive and fully human? Might my own consciousness, that famous line from Einstein, no problem can be solved by the same consciousness that created it. And I've quoted that many times, and I probably said it on this podcast, so sorry. But the follow-up question is, well, how has our consciousness expanded? Like, it's not good enough just to say that. Like, well, what would shatter and expand and shape and form our consciousness into something larger? And at least I want to hold out the possibility of an experience of the transcendent, which will always be impossible to speak about. And the only way we will be able to speak about it is through symbols, images, analogies, allegories, metaphors, hints, guesses, clues. So if you can feel kind of in your own being a longing for reality with a capital R, okay, welcome to being a human. And Underhill says something, she identifies this as something specific. She calls it the instinct for the absolute. It's something I've always wondered, like how well did Jung know Evelyn Underhill's work, and how well did Evelyn Underhill know Jung's work? Because Jung, of course, talks about the religious instinct, and I think he means something slightly different. I take him to mean largely the instinct toward ultimate meaning. And what I hear Evelyn Underhill doing, I think, is taking it a bit further, and she capitalizes absolute. She says, no, within every human being is the instinct for the absolute, for the totality. In other words, for the whole, WHOLE, that kind of whole, for God. And she says that instinct is alive. And the mystic, at least, is one who not only is aware of this instinct for the absolute, but then commits the rest of their life. They orient the rest of their life through discipline and practice and sort of a way of being as if nothing else matters. And that's partly why I say I'm not a mystic. I'm not a saint. I'm not a mystic. I haven't oriented my entire life toward the sacred. I have to be honest about that. And it makes it, and the mystic is being thrown around these days. Someone the other day called me a nature mystic. And at first I was like, it's cooler than being called something else, I guess. But it also made me uncomfortable. I was like, no. Especially, in an age that is absolutely starving for identity and will cling to anything. Almost the worst one would be to cling to some sort of identity as a mystic. I heard a pastor talking not that long ago that who was claiming to be a mystic because he had a few psychedelic experiences. And I think this is really a state and stage confusion from Ken Wilber. Just because you've had certain states of consciousness or so-called altered states of consciousness doesn't make you a mystic. It just means you've had an altered state of consciousness, and you don't want to confuse the stage as it. Maybe there's a certain higher order or stage that we would put the mystics in, but just because you've had an altered state of consciousness doesn't automatically make you one. So let's back way off here and say, maybe more than anything else, we need to listen to the mystics before we go around claiming to be one. And after all, are you really orienting your entire life toward the instinct of the absolute as if it's the only beloved that matters? Because that's the language of the mystics. They fall in love with the transcendent, with God. And it's a kind of inner marriage, and nothing else matters. So, okay, calm down a little bit. In fact, I'm not trying to turn any of you into mystics, but I'm saying maybe we ought to be exercising some of our fuller faculties that at least open us up to the possibility of the transcendent seeping in, of the breeze at dawn blowing in. And that's what I want to talk about. I kind of have, 3 or 4 things I want to say here. Here's the first. We need the imaginal. We need the imaginal. And in Jungian typology, you have thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. And I think Bill Plotkin wisely and interestingly changes intuition or expands a little bit and includes imagination, the imaginal realm, as a window of knowing, as a, what's the fancy word, epistemological way of coming to know the world. Of course we have thinking, and of course we have feeling, and we have sensing, but we also have the imaginal. And you don't get very far in terms of a taste of the mystical without exercising the muscle of the imaginal. Because the only way to speak about hints, guesses, clues, mysteries is through the imaginal language of the symbol of symbolism, we could say. So we need to exercise the muscle. And you say, how would you do that? How would you exercise that? Well, what's your relationship like with poetry and art? What if you made one room in your house as beautiful as possible, and you quit spending money on flat screen TVs? If that's the thing anymore, flat screen TVs, yes. And you bought the most beautiful piece of art that spoke to you in some way and put it on the wall. See, that's exercising the muscle of the imaginal. What is my relationship with beauty, with art, with poetry, with dance, with movement, and with my own imagination? Drawing and painting and working with dreams and using your imagination. It's a faculty here. I hear the train coming, which is part of living here in Georgia. So it's important, I think, to exercise this muscle. I think this is why Jesus says, unless you change and become like a child, you cannot enter the kingdom of God. And children, especially healthy children, are absolutely filled with imagination and with wonder. And they're able to hold the hand of the secrets of the universe, you could say, because they have a kind of curiosity and openness, and that muscle is atrophied. And so when we read the mystics, when we read Therese of Avalon, we see that for her the soul is like a 7-roomed mansion, a thing of beauty, and in the inner realms dwells both the true self, she doesn't use that word exactly, and God. Well, that sounds like, what are we talking about? Because we're so out of practice. We want to know the brain science, and I'm not against brain science. Something I just read recently about, there's a new book out about dreams, and it's a scientific book. It's not really the way I usually am working or thinking about dreams. But one of the things that's interesting is that, they've been tracking what happens to the brain, and it's nothing short of an explosion of brain activity every time you dream. And here's something fascinating. There's a fair amount of evidence that as soon as the heart stops, something like the dream state in the brain absolutely explodes. And if that makes sense to me, it's like why near-death experiences are so filled with numinosity and light and wonder and mystery, as if you're dreaming, because in a way you are dreaming. And we say, well, that's not real. The scientific mind says that's just hormones, synapses, and chemicals. And I say, well, my view is that's just the physical manifestation or the physical rubric or lens through which we're trying to understand the totality of reality, of consciousness. That's just one angle, one lens, one way of understanding it. But what's amazing to me is that there the imaginal is exploding, we could say, upon death. Of course, why wouldn't it be? It's a realm of understanding the larger reality. So practice wonder, practice art, practice imagination, draw, paint, especially if you're no good at it, paint and draw. Or if you're really good at painting and drawing and terrible at writing, write poems, play with the world. Play with your own children. Play with, your nieces and nephews. Learn to be a kid again. This is why at least one reason, why I lead retreats and programs and intensives. And you could say, what are you doing out there? Some of it is we're just exercising the imaginal. We're speaking out loud to the forest. We're wandering and as if everything is alive and aware of our presence. And sometimes we do archetypal wanders, which sounds fancy, but it's not. And it's like wander as if you might meet an elder in the forest. And that often happens. And then you have a conversation. That's like a kid. That's like playing. And some part of us comes alive. And this muscle is necessary, I think, if we're to be a little more open to the mysteries. Here's number 2. It's a repeat of my last couple of podcasts, that tradition matters. And here I'm taking the most expansive understanding of tradition, period. Not only the forms, rituals, ceremonies, doctrine statements, outfits that we think of as the outer husk here of tradition, but also the contents inside that container. The tradition matters because when you and I have even the slightest hint of the transcendent, we actually need tradition, in my opinion, to understand it. Partly so we don't feel like we're insane, but also to provide some borders and boundaries so we don't fall in love with our own narcissistic, so that we don't become spiritual narcissists. That's the best way of saying it. That's the great danger with the explosion of psychedelics. It's like a kind of, forgive the word, but a kind of spiritual masturbation. And it can be. I say that with some hesitation because it doesn't have to be. But a kind of spiritual masturbation, a kind of self-indulgence, and the larger frame in which it rests doesn't matter. Because what we've done is colonized psychedelics, ripped them out of their tradition and kind of invented our own, where we get to be pretend shamans and chant in Peruvian, even though it's not our native tongue, this kind of stuff, and say, let's throw some caution here. And so anyway, tradition matters. And like I was saying before at the beginning of this podcast, tradition and innovation, mystical insights and doctrines need to collide, and both are changed in the process. A simple way of saying it too is we need ancient voices. We need Rumi. We need Rilke. We need T.S. Eliot. Those are the poets. And we need the author of The Cloud of Unknowing, whose single metaphor is, you think you know, Well, you get to a point, and every once in a while you're called into the cloud, and you're enveloped in a cloud of unknowing, and everything you think you know, including what you think you know about God or, quote, the divine, gets enveloped in a cloud of darkness. And here the real work begins. What an image to leave people with. What an image to challenge the very rigid structures of our religion. Yeah, let the cloud descend, which will lead us to shut our mouths. Okay, here's the third point. And in some ways, it's not a surprising point if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, but I still want to be clear about it. I think we still need the word God. And maybe we need a kind of expanded understanding of that word. But okay, about 20 years ago, Brian McLaren, who's a friend, you probably know him if you've been around Christian circles, know of his work. He said that maybe we ought to take a 20-year break from the word God. And I just loved this at the time. Like, first of all, it was kind of provocative, and he was speaking largely to evangelicals, to people like me. I think at the time I was a worship leader, and yeah, I mean, like a 20-year break sounds about right. And okay, the other day I just realized the 20 years are up. That was my feeling. And now I think we do need the word God. Maybe we need the word God in quotation marks, but we need a way, a pointer, to be in conversation with the transcendent, with reality, or with the absolute, to capitalize both of those. And I'm no longer afraid of the word God, or afraid of using the word God. I think, although I do use it with some hesitation, we need an expanded view. And that's in a way partly what I mean by why we can't just dispense with religion altogether. It is the historical record of the great conversation with the transcendent. And we might want to say that still matters. And okay, so I want to open something up here without going crazy, because Evelyn Underhill is helpful to me in how we might expand our understanding of the word God. And I want to create two camps here. The two camps are God as being, or the absolute otherness, or unknowableness, utterly transcendent, distant. In other words, the totality of being. This is what the great philosophers, including the Greeks and the early Christian theologians, even the Eastern Buddhist tradition, the absolute, the nothingness, the uncreated and undifferentiated. This is God as absolute, we could say, and as otherness, or transcendence in a simple sense. And the other camp is God as becoming. Instead of absolute totality, undifferentiated, ultimately unknowable otherness of being with a capital B, we have the universe as becoming, as utter emergence, continual utter emergence, which in some ways is a little more of how we understand the very tip of evolution. Like, what is the very leading edge of of evolution itself, of the universe becoming, of the expanding universe ever expanding and speeding up? What is that? It's like nothing is fixed. It's sort of like saying the totality is not fixed. And that's the becomingness of reality. So we have being and becoming are kind of these two camps. And I think they're extremely important when we're contemplating words like God. Well, what do we mean? And is it one or the other? And to be honest, I'm a little more drawn, like just on almost like a sort of, I was going to say sort of my intuition, or my disposition might be a better way of saying it, is to lean more into the realm of becoming. She goes back to Heraclitus, who calls Logos the living fire. And which is a little bit different than how most people use logos, but it's like a living fire of becoming that is constantly bringing the world into being, and you could say bringing God into being. And in that sense, God is not fixed. God is expanding. And what a mystery, what a strange mystery, going all the way back to Heraclitus, and from Heraclitus to Nietzsche have a similar view of the universe as becoming. And in fact, in a way, universe, one whole, one totality, is the thing in question. It's like the totality is just becoming. So I know I'm speaking symbolically and kind of like poetically here, but I hope you get a flavor for these two camps, being and becoming, and they're extremely important when we're contemplating God or even contemplating the denial of God. What do we mean? And we can feel the tension between the two. And yeah, I kind of lean in toward, you know, the old phrase, God is, maybe you don't, but the old phrase in Baptist circles is God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And that's God as absolute otherness. And there's a lot of wisdom and power in being brought to your knees before the otherness of the other. God is unchanging. The totality is unchanging. Well, the opposite coin is sort of God as becoming. She calls this vitalism. That's the school of thought from Heraclitus to the present. So this is in her chapter, Mysticism and Vitalism has a lot to offer in almost expanding not only our theological musings about the divine, but also our phenomenological experience of life itself. Like, what's it like to be alive? And is it not a process of becoming? And isn't the life cycle itself a process of becoming? So anyway, these are the twin gods, so to speak. And the mystic comes along. I'm not going to say much about this, but I think pretty powerfully, Evelyn Underhill makes a case that at least the Christian mystics are able to hold these two opposing poles, paradoxes, in tension, and come out and say something like, God is both, which is easy to say abstractly. Like I could say, well, why choose? It's unfixed, unattainable, unknowable, totally absolute, utterly transcendent and distant, and it's also immanent, emergent, profoundly here and ever becoming. Yeah, I can say that. The mystic says, I know that. I've experienced that. And she says, I won't get into the weeds here, but she says the Trinity is an expression of that, is the interplay of being and becoming. It's an image of the interplay of being and becoming, which is profound in and of itself, but I'm just going to leave that for the time being. But my main point is here, point 3, we need an ever-expanding understanding of the word God, whether we deny God or believe in God. Let's let that, our own room that we have explored with our own ego consciousness expand when it comes to this. Here's a line from Jung. To this day, God, in quotation marks, is the name by which I designate all things which cross my willful path violently and recklessly, all things which upset my subjective views, plans, and intentions, and change the course of my life for better or worse. He wrote this in a letter to a friend. Okay, what? God is all things which upset my subjective views. According to this, I'd be, in the streets, not that I'm much of a protester, saying we need God because we need our subjective views, plans, and intentions disrupted. We need something to change the course of our life for better or worse, for the window to be left open and the breeze at dawn to disrupt our carefully organized desk. Yes, I would like my subjective views, plans, and intentions upset. Not all the time. I mean, dear God, please. But some of the time, yes. And I can adhere to this way of speaking about the divine, about God. Or maybe you've heard Barry Taylor, Pete Holmes recently made this more famous because he put it in in one of his stand-up bits. Barry Taylor was the stage manager for AC/DC. I met him a few times. We talked about my book, and he was at my book release just by accident. very cool guy. Anyway, he says God is the name for the blanket we put over the mystery in order to give it shape. Okay, yeah, that's an influx. That's an image that expands what we mean by God, and let's rest in that. Let's allow that. How might that expand? How might that help us sit by the window, so to speak? Maybe that's enough for the time being. Thanks for, staying with me this long, if you did. 55 minutes so far. I want to end with a possibility and a poem. Here's the possibility. The old will dream dreams and the young see visions. We're in an age of increased isolation and anxiety and depression and fear and worry and a kind of facade around our connectedness through social media and through our modes of communication, giving us an illusion of friendship and intimacy. It's a dark age. It's a kind of new dark ages. And not to mention wars and rumors of wars, to quote a line from Revelation, and what we now know about the biosphere and the collapse of certain ecosystems and things to be concerned about. And it seems to me, I guess kind of what I was hinting at the beginning, is that an age like this is also an opportunity, because as dark as these dimensions are, they deepen the longing. At least in my view, they deepen the longing for what's real, for what's absolute. They awaken, if we'll let it, the instinct for the absolute. And what would happen if we, instead of being overcome with despair, felt the heartbreak of the world? Even allowed in feelings of darkness and meanness and meaninglessness. Say, okay, that we're not going to deny that this is the case, but to not give in to despair and to scoot our chair closer to the window. Like, what is ultimately the case? What is the largest view of reality that is calling to me, that is luring me to the edge of my own frames, my own subjective views and plans and intentions, to scoot up next to the mystics, to the poets, to the artists, to the saints, to the wanderers, and let the possibility that the transcendent wants to break forth again. And when that happens, the old dream dreams and the young see visions. And perhaps that is in fact what is happening, more than the creeping nihilism of our age. Maybe despite that, something new wants to break forth. And that's my deepest intuition. I actually think that's the case. And you know the old Leonard Cohen line, there's a crack in everything, and that's where the light comes in. And yeah, it's something like that. So here's a Rumi poem, just to end things here. This being human is a guest house. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. From beyond what, we might wonder? From beyond the room of our consciousness. Out beyond the window into the uncreated light. Thanks for listening.